tried to classify your species, I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply. Multiply until every natural resource is consumed. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. A virus.
I remember the first time that I was shown footage obtained by undercover investigators of how animals had suffered and died for my dinner, my clothing, my entertainment, and my well-intentioned charitable contributions. Animals on factory farms and laboratories, zoos, circuses, aquariums, amusement parks, rodeos, all of it. They are all routinely beaten. They are denied everything natural to them. They are isolated, burned, electrocuted, brain damaged, blinded. They are beaten, as I said before, and they are whipped into submission. They are left to linger in cold cages alone without any painkillers until they are killed.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
We now have the power to create new life forms, but also to destroy much of life on Earth, including ourselves. On the other hand, the threat of technological disruption. We are creating extremely powerful tools like AI that could undermine human civilization. And maybe the worst thing is that instead of uniting in order to face these common challenges to our species, we are dividing, we are fighting each other more and more.
Once we're prepared to admit that after all we're not the only beings with personalities, minds, and above all feelings, and then we start to think about ways we use and abuse so many other sentient, sapient creatures on this planet, it really gives cause for deep shame, at least for me. We're harming ourselves around the world, as well as harming the animals, as well as harming nature herself, Mother Nature that brought us into being.
UN panel of experts has found that 1 million animal and plant species face extinction.
It is worse than expected. This is happening much faster than we've ever seen before.
Today, we are the asteroid that's causing many, many species to go extinct simultaneously.
We're talking about millions of animals being snatched from the wild, from thousands of species.
Well, maybe the most important question to ask about humans, about humanity, is if we are so smart, why are we doing so many stupid things?
Meat today is the new asbestos, more murderous than tobacco. CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide from the livestock industry are killing our oceans with acidic, hypoxic dead zones. 90% of small fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows today are the world's largest ocean predators. The oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Billions of bouncy little chicks are ground up alive simply because they are male. Only 100 billion people have ever lived. 7 billion people live today. And yet we torture and kill 2 billion sentient living beings every week. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one. And we're now facing the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call them a virus. It is a crime against humanity of unimaginable proportions.
The things that make us human are not what we think. What makes us human is that we are the most extreme. We are the most compassionate. We are the most violent. We are the most creative. And we are the most destructive animals ever to appear on this planet. But we are not the only animals that love one another. We are not the only ones who care for our mates or for our children. Albatrosses routinely fly 6,000 to 10,000 miles to bring back one meal for their chick.
we are animals. We're not plants. We're not fungi. We're not bacteria. We are animals. There is a double standard in our ethics at present, which builds a wall around our own species, Homo sapiens, which is rather unevolutionary. If you think about the fact that we are close cousins of chimpanzees, if you think about the fact that we are descended from a common ancestor that lived only about 6 or 7 million years ago. If you want to erect a moral wall around our species and say, for example, that a human embryo, even a very beginning human embryo, long before it develops a nervous system, is somehow worthy of more moral consideration than an adult chimpanzee, then that is a rather unevolutionary viewpoint. If we look back in history, a couple of centuries ago, most people accepted slavery, and nowadays, of course, that's a horrifying thought. No civilized person today accepts slavery. And if you look back further still, we had the appalling things that the Romans were doing in the Colosseum with spectator sport, watching people killing other people, or lions killing people, regarding it as fun, entertainment to take the children out to. My view would be that we want to avoid suffering. Therefore, the criterion would be, can this creature suffer? There's every reason to think that mammals, at least, and probably many more, can suffer perhaps as much as we can pain. Think about what pain is for, biologically speaking. Pain is a warning to the animal, don't do that again. If the animal does something which results in pain, that is a kind of ritual death. It's telling the animal, if you do that again, you might die and you might fail to reproduce. That's why natural selection has built pain into our nervous system. It's built the capacity to feel pain into our nervous system. Pain feels like something primitive, feels like something like seeing color or smelling a rose or something like that. It doesn't feel like the kind of thing for which you need intellect. And actually, you can go even further than that. You might say, since pain is there to warn the animal not to do that again, an animal which is a slow learner, an animal which is not particularly intelligent, might actually need more intense pain in order to deter it from doing that again than a human who is intelligent enough to learn quickly not to do that again. So it's even possible that non-human animals are capable of feeling more intense pain than we are. I'm not sure how far I want to push that argument, but I think at least I can say there's absolutely no reason to suppose that they feel less pain than we do, and we should give them the benefit of the doubt.
I believe that grief is the right word to use for numerous animals who mourn the dead. They may be friends or mates or relatives, because these visible cues, these behavioral cues, tell us something about an animal's emotional state. Now, for the last 7 years, I've been working to document examples of animal grief in birds, in mammals, in domesticated animals, and in wild animals. And I believe in the reality of animal grief. If we deny evolutionary continuity, we are really missing out on embracing part of ourselves. Now, in any case, animals are not going to grieve exactly like we do. We have human creativity. We paint our grief, dance our grief, write our grief. Animals don't grieve exactly like we do, but this doesn't mean that their grief isn't real. It is real, and it's searing, and we can see it if we choose.
People sometimes describe nature as a dog-eat-dog world. Some of the biologists depicting nature as a battlefield, basically where selfish tendencies tend to prevail. And for morality, the evolution of morality, there's very little room. What they mean is that all they see is competition. I win, you lose, winning is better than losing, and so on. That's totally wrong. I've fought against that sort of characterization of animal society all my life, because just like human society, it is built on a lot of friendship and cooperation at the same time. We like to deny that connection that exists between us and animals. Certain tendencies, such as a sense of fairness, empathy, caring for others, helping others, following rules, punishing individuals who don't follow the rules, all of these tendencies can be observed in other primates, and I think these are the ingredients that we use to build a moral society. The whole spectrum of both very positive behavior and very negative behavior can be seen in other animals. Animals can be heroic and they can be genuinely altruistic. We actually tested in our chimpanzees.
so we've only done 40 years in the wild so far. And we find chimps are capable of true compassion and altruism. We find in their non-verbal communication, this is very rich. They have a lot of sounds which they use in different circumstances, but they also use touch, posture, gesture. And what do? They kiss, they embrace, they hold hands, they pat one another on the back, they swagger, they shake their fist. The kind of things that we do, and they do them in the same kind of context. They have very sophisticated cooperation. Sometimes they hunt, not that often, but when they hunt, they show sophisticated cooperation and they share the prey. We find that they show emotions similar to, maybe sometimes the same, as those that we describe in ourselves as happiness, sadness, fear, despair. They know mental as well as physical suffering.
95% of what we do are primate tendencies and primate emotions and primate sociality. And there is a certain part that is uniquely human, obviously. For example, I'm talking here to a TV screen, which is pretty unique, I would say, but still, I'm communicating and making facial expressions and gestures. I'm communicating with an audience, which is a very primate thing to do. And so we have this very interesting combination of our cultural and technical achievements with our old primate heritage, but I always look more at the primate heritage than anything else.
We have things going on in our minds that we tend to assume are the exclusive abilities of humans. But there are other brains out there. Some of them are very big. What are they doing with those big brains? Can they think? Can they feel? How can we possibly find a way into that question? Well, there are ways in. We can look at the brain, we can look at evolution, and we can look at behaviors. When grouper fish chase a prey fish into a crevice in the coral, they will go to where they know a moray eel is sleeping, and they will signal to the moray, "Follow me." The moray goes, the moray will slither into the crevice. Sometimes the moray will get the fish, sometimes the fish bolts, and the grouper gets it. It's a partnership. Sea otters use stone tools, and sea otters take time away from their own doings to teach baby sea otters what to do. Chimpanzees use tools, but chimpanzees don't take time to teach. Killer whales teach, and they share food. When we look at human brains, we see that the human brain is an elaboration on earlier brains, an elaboration that comes through the long sweep of evolution. If you look at the human brain and a chimpanzee brain, you see that the human brain is basically a very big chimpanzee brain. It's big, at least, so we can retain a certain insecure sense of our own superiority, which is the main thing that matters to us. But there's a dolphin brain. Bigger, more convolution. What is it doing with that brain? We can see brains, but cannot see minds. Yet we can see the workings of minds in the logic of behaviors. These elephants, in this family of elephants, they have found a shady patch under the palms. That's a good place to let the babies go to sleep. The adults are resting too, but they're just dozing and they're staying a little bit vigilant all the time. We make sense of that because they make sense of the world in similar ways. They look relaxed because they are relaxed. They've chosen the shade for the same reason we would choose the shade. These elephants don't look relaxed. No one would make that mistake looking at them. They seem alarmed. They are alarmed. There are dangers. There are people who hurt them. It turns out that if you record the conversations of tourists and you record the conversations of herders who sometimes hurt elephants, and then you play it through a hidden speaker, the elephants ignore the tourists, but they bunch up and flee in fear from the conversations of herders. They put different kinds of humans in different categories. They know what's going on. They know who their friends are. They know who their enemies are. They know who their family members are. They have the same imperatives that we have, whether on land or in the sea. It's the same. Stay alive, keep your babies alive, let life continue. We see and understand helping. We see curiosity in the young. We see the bonds of family members. We recognize affection for what it is. Courtship is courtship. One of the mysteries is, why don't they harm us very much at all? No free-living killer whale has ever hurt a human being. They eat seals. Why don't they ever eat us? Why is it that on more than one occasion killer whales have returned to researchers who got lost in the fog and guided them miles to home? These are the mysteries of other minds.
The general tendency of the universe is to move from order and structure to lack of order, lack of structure, in fact to mush. What we see around us is staggering complexity. So here's a great puzzle. In a universe ruled by the second law of thermodynamics, how is it possible to generate the sort of complexity I've described? Well, the answer seems to be the universe can create complexity, but with great difficulty.
What is the journey from low entropy to high entropy like? And how is it affected by the laws of physics so that the actual path it takes leads to complex structures?
In 1865, Clausius summarizes the first two laws of thermodynamics like this. First, the energy of the universe is constant. Second, the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. In other words, energy spreads out over time. The second law is core to so many phenomena in the world. It's why hot things cool down and cool things heat up, why gas expands to fill a container, why you can't have a perpetual motion machine, because the amount of usable energy in a closed system is always decreasing. But if total entropy is constantly increasing, and anything we do only accelerates that increase, then how is there any structure left on Earth? How are there hot parts separate from cold parts? How does life exist? Well, if the Earth were a closed system, the energy would spread out completely, meaning all life would cease, everything would decay and mix, and eventually reach the same temperature. But luckily, Earth is not a closed system, because we have the sun. What the sun really gives us is a steady stream of low entropy, that is, concentrated, bundled up energy. Plants capture this energy and use it to grow and create sugars. Then animals eat plants and use that energy to maintain their bodies and move around. Bigger animals get their energy by eating smaller animals, and so on. And each step of the way, the energy becomes more spread out. Ultimately, all the energy that reaches Earth from the sun is converted into thermal energy. And then it's radiated back into space. And everything that happens on Earth, plants growing, trees falling, herds stampeding, hurricanes and tornadoes, people eating, sleeping, and breathing, all of it happens in the process of converting fewer, higher energy photons into 20 times as many lower energy photons. Without a source of concentrated energy and a way to discard the spread out energy, life on Earth would not be possible. It has even been suggested that life itself may be a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics. If the universe tends toward maximum entropy, then life offers a way to accelerate that natural tendency. Because life is spectacularly good at converting low entropy into high entropy. You start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be so surprising that you get a plant. So life on Earth survives on the low entropy from the sun. But then, where did the sun get its low entropy? The answer is the universe. If we know that the total entropy of the universe is increasing with time, then it was lower entropy yesterday, and even lower entropy the day before that, and so on all the way back to the Big Bang.
Let's begin by winding the timeline back 13.7 billion years to the beginning of time.
To me, it's amazing some of the things that we actually do know. There's plenty of things that are conjecture or theories, but there's a lot of stuff that we have real observations and real knowledge of. And amazingly to me, one of the things is, where did all the atoms in our body come from? And it is actually a real fact, not a theory, that when you look back at how the universe looked about, say 13 billion years ago, the chemistry was very, very different. We can actually see so far away out into space that the light we're looking at took billions and billions of years to get to us, even at the speed of light. And the farthest away we can see is to a time that was about 400,000 years after the Big Bang. That's pretty impressive. That's about 13.5 billion years ago. And when you look back that far, the only thing you see is very hot hydrogen gas. A little bit of helium, tiny little bit of lithium, but that's it. That's not a theory, that's actually an observation. And as you look at galaxies very far away in space and therefore very far back in time, you can actually watch the chemistry change. You watch different atoms get built up. And the only thing in the universe that we know that can make a large atom, by large I mean something like oxygen, or carbon, or calcium, or anything that makes up our bodies, is actually the very core of a star. That's where nuclear fusion reactions ram hydrogen together. The hydrogen was formed during the Big Bang. You take these hydrogen atoms, you smash them together, and you build larger and larger atoms until you build something like the carbon that makes up most of my body. And so we've known for a while that the only way you get these large atoms is stars. But even with something as powerful as the core of a star, there were some atoms that were a little bit more slippery. We couldn't quite figure out how you get the energy needed to make something really big like a gold atom. That should take even higher temperatures, even more energy than what you typically find in the core of a massive star. So what is even more violent than an exploding massive star, which makes a lot of heavy elements in the universe? One of the things we discovered recently is that two dead cores of stars called neutron stars can actually spiral together and collide. And when they collide, instead of a normal death of an exploding star, you basically have something like that on steroids. You have an explosion that's so big and so violent, people have really seen nothing like it since the Big Bang. They call this, sometimes they call it a hypernova, sometimes they call it a gamma ray burst because of the burst of high energy radiation that comes out. But wonderfully, we've been observing more and more of these colliding neutron stars, and they are just pumping out gold atoms, platinum atoms, interestingly enough bismuth, but these very, very large, difficult to form atoms. And there's so much gold created in one of these explosions that if you just look at the rate, how many of these explosions do we observe? Amazingly, we observe about one a day. And how much gold is created in one of those. And you can actually account for the entire abundance of gold in the universe just from that one thing, those colliding neutron stars. So the gold you have, I mean, yeah, you have gold in your jewelry, that's really cool, I've got a gold ring. But interestingly enough, our neurons don't work without a tiny little bit of gold to help our brain actually charge the neurons in our brain. You need a little bit of gold and a little bit of copper. So your brain wouldn't work without a little bit of gold, a couple gold atoms in the neurons. So the reason we're here thinking and moving and actually existing the way we do is intimately connected to these colliding dead stars, these colliding neutron stars that most likely created all of the gold in this room.
Rocky planets like our Earth are significantly more complex than stars because they contain a much greater diversity of materials. The next stage introduces entities that are significantly more fragile, significantly more vulnerable, but they're also much more creative and much more capable of generating further complexity. I'm talking, of course, about living organisms. Living organisms are created by chemistry. We are huge packages of chemicals. So chemistry is dominated by the electromagnetic force. That operates over smaller scales than gravity, which explains why you and I are smaller than stars or planets. Those deep oceanic vents, fantastic chemistry began to happen, and atoms combined in all sorts of exotic combinations. But of course, life is more than just exotic chemistry.
For millennia, people had it in mind that all the wonderful things they saw in the world, all the beautiful design of the animals and plants and living things, must be due to a fabulously intelligent designer, a creator. And so it was until Darwin came along and turned that upside down and realized that, in principle, there could be a process with no intelligence, no comprehension, no foresight, no purpose, that would just inexorably grind out, algorithmically, better and better and better designs of all sorts and create the living world where there had been just lifeless matter before. And this was a shocking idea to many people. Even to Darwin, in some regards, it was shocking. But he was right. He had the essentials right, and now, 150 years later, there's just no question about it. He was right.
How do you stabilize those huge molecules that seem to be viable? Well, it's here that life introduces an entirely new trick. You don't stabilize the individual, you stabilize the template, the thing that carries information, and you allow the template to copy itself. And DNA, of course, is the beautiful molecule that contains that information. And DNA also copies itself. So it copies itself and scatters the templates through the ocean. So the information spreads. Notice that information has become part of our story. The real beauty of DNA, though, is in its imperfections. As it copies itself, once in every billion runs, there tends to be an error. And what that means is that DNA is, in effect, learning. It's accumulating new ways of making living organisms because some of those errors work. So DNA is learning and it's building greater diversity and greater complexity. For most of that time of life on Earth, living organisms have been relatively simple, single cells, but they had great diversity and inside great complexity. Then from about 600 to 800 million years ago, multi-celled organisms appear. You get fungi, you get fish, you get plants, you get amphibia, you get reptiles, and then of course you get the dinosaurs. 65 million years ago, an asteroid landed on Earth near the Yucatan Peninsula, creating conditions equivalent to those of a nuclear war. And the dinosaurs are wiped out. Terrible news for the dinosaurs, but great news for our mammalian ancestors who flourished in the niches left empty by the dinosaurs. And we human beings are part of that creative evolutionary pulse that began 65 million years ago with the landing of an asteroid. We've seen that DNA learns, in a sense. It accumulates information, but it is so slow. DNA accumulates information through random errors that some of which just happen to work. But DNA had actually generated a faster way of learning. It had produced organisms with brains. And those organisms can learn in real time. They accumulate information, they learn. The sad thing is, when they die, the information dies with them.
We have to go to tool use in the chimpanzees. Now, these chimpanzees are using tools, and we take that as a sign of their intelligence. But if they really were intelligent, why would they use a stick to extract termites from the ground rather than a shovel? And if they really were intelligent, why would they crack open nuts with a rock? Why wouldn't they just go to a shop and buy a bag of nuts that somebody else had already cracked open for them? Why not? I mean, that's what we do.
There are many people who think that the animal world is hardwired and that there's something very, very special about man. Maybe it's his ability to have causal thought. Maybe it's something special in his brain that allows him to have language. Maybe it's something special in his brain that allows him to make tools or to have mathematics. Well, I don't know. There were Tasmanians who were discovered around the 1600s, and they had no fire. They had no stone tools. To our knowledge, they had no music. So when you compare them to the bonobo, the bonobo is a little hairier. He doesn't stand quite as upright, but there are a lot of similarities. And I think that as we look at culture, we kind of come to understand how we got to where we are. And I don't really think it's in our biology. I think we've attributed it to our biology, but I don't really think it's there.
It's a piece of neural audio technology for rewiring other people's minds. I'm talking about your language, of course, because it allows you to implant a thought from your mind directly into someone else's mind, and they can attempt to do the same to you, and without either of you having to perform surgery. Language is our genes talking, getting things that they want.
Now, what makes humans different is human language. We are blessed with a language, a system of communication so powerful and so precise that we can share what we've learned with such precision that it can accumulate in the collective memory. And that means it can outlast the individuals who learnt that information, and it can accumulate from generation to generation. And that's why as a species we're so creative and so powerful, and that's why we have a history. We seem to be the only species in 4 billion years to have this gift. I call this ability collective learning. It's what makes us different.
Now, the reason that chimpanzees don't do that is that they lack what psychologists and anthropologists call social learning. They seem to lack the ability to learn from others by copying or imitating or simply watching. But by comparison, we can learn. Social learning is visual theft. If I can learn by watching you, I can steal your best ideas, and I can benefit from your efforts without having to put in the time and energy that you did into developing them. Social learning really is visual theft, and in any species that acquired it, it would behoove you to hide your best ideas lest somebody steal them from you. Language evolved to solve the crisis of visual theft. Language is a piece of social technology for enhancing the benefits of cooperation, for reaching agreements, for striking deals, and for coordinating our activities.
We can see it at work in the earliest stages of human history. We evolved as a species in the savanna lands of Africa, but then you see humans migrating into new environments, into desert lands, into jungles, into the ice age tundra of Siberia, tough environment, into the Americas, into Australasia. Each migration involved learning new ways of exploiting the environment, new ways of dealing with their surroundings. Then 10,000 years ago, exploiting a sudden change in global climate with the end of the last ice age, humans learned to farm. Farming was an energy bonanza, and exploiting that energy, human populations multiplied, human societies got larger, denser, more interconnected. And then, from about 500 years ago, humans began to link up globally through shipping, through trains, through telegraph, through the internet, until now we seem to form a single global brain of almost 7 billion individuals, and that brain is learning at warp speed. And in the last 200 years, something else has happened. We've stumbled on another energy bonanza in fossil fuels. So fossil fuels and collective learning together explain the staggering complexity we see around us.
In principle, what we are is just a big collection of elementary particles. And those particles, for all we currently know, make up everything around us, the entire universe, including us. But a lot of people have a difficulty with that. They want there to be something else, this thing that they call the soul.
This physics perspective goes against the idea that philosophers like to call dualism, that consciousness is explained by adding something beyond physics, some extra ingredient, a life force, elan vital, or a soul.
The ordinary words of popular psychology, like emotion and feeling and thinking and so forth, are hundreds of years old, and each of them is a clever way society has developed to not think about what's going on. Well, I think the word consciousness is a clever trick that we use to keep from thinking about how thinking works. The people who talk about a soul are just people who are too ignorant or unambitious or lazy, or I don't know what insults to hurl at them. You say, this is an unambitious, faith-ridden person.
I understand why they think that, and I think it's just, it is wonderful, but it is not a miracle, and it isn't magic. It's a bunch of tricks. And consciousness is a bunch of tricks in the brain. And we're learning what those tricks are and how they fit together.
What I am saying, however, is that the self is an illusion. The sense of
being an ego, an I, a thinker of thoughts in addition to the thoughts. And we know that everything you experience, your conscious emotions and thoughts and moods and the impulses that initiate behavior, all of these things are delivered by myriad different processes in the brain that are spread out over the whole of the brain.
This whole physics perspective really begs the question, how can something as complicated as consciousness possibly be explained by something as simple as particles? So it's not the molecules, not the particles that make the difference, it's the pattern into which they're arranged. If I drift off into sleep and my consciousness goes away, I'm still made out of the exact same particles. The only thing that changed is the pattern into which my particles were arranged.
Consciousness for each of us is all there is. Without it, there's no world, there's no self, there's nothing at all. And when we suffer consciously, whether it's through mental illness or pain. Well, for today, I'd just like to think of consciousness in two different ways. There are experiences of the world around us, and then there's conscious self. Let's start with experiences of the world around us, and with the important idea of the brain as a prediction engine.
Is there an external reality? Of course there's an external reality. The world exists, it's just that we don't see it as it is. We can never see it as it is. In fact, it's even useful to not see it as it is.
Our senses are also making up the tastes, odors, and colors that we experience. They're not properties of an objective reality, they're actually properties of our senses that they're fabricating. Evolution, by natural selection, has shaped us with perceptions that are designed to keep us alive.
So I'm going to use a metaphor to describe how the brain works. Your brain, my brain, everybody's brain, is trapped in its own dark, silent box called your skull. And the brain has no knowledge of what is going on around it in the world. And it's receiving sensory signals from the sensory surfaces of your body. These signals are the outcomes of some changes in the world or in the body. But the brain doesn't know what the changes are. It's receiving the outcomes. And that is what philosophers and scientists call the reverse inference problem. You start with an outcome and you have to guess at the cause.
The brain doesn't hear sound or see light. What we perceive is its best guess of what's out there in the world. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time, including right now. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. Now I'm going to tell you that your experience of being a self, the specific experience of being you, is also a controlled hallucination generated by the brain. Now this seems a very strange idea, right? Yes, visual illusions might deceive my eyes, but how could I be deceived about what it means to be me? For most of us, the experience of being a person is so familiar, so unified and so continuous that it's difficult not to take it for granted. But we shouldn't take it for granted. We predict ourselves into existence. Our own individual inner universe, our way of being conscious, is just one possible way of being conscious. Our individual selves and worlds are unique to each of us, but they're all grounded in biological mechanisms shared with many other living creatures. With a greater sense of understanding comes a greater sense of wonder and a greater realization that we are part of and not apart from the rest of nature. And when the end of consciousness comes, there's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing at all.
Having experiences has the same meaning as being sentient. We have seen that because we don't know exactly what structures are necessary to give rise to consciousness, we can't know for sure exactly which beings are sentient. However, there are some indicators for the presence of sentience that we can look for. The question of sentience is more difficult when it comes to animals that are more numerous, that is, invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals that don't have backbones, and they are typically small. Arthropods generally live in complex, demanding worlds, where it seems like consciousness would have adaptive value. Many people think insects aren't conscious, maybe because they are so small and people know little about them. But in fact, some insects are capable of some pretty complex behaviors and traits. There is evidence that fruit flies respond in a non-reflexive way that is reminiscent of anxiety. When there is a shadow overhead, a possible predator, they will often stop eating and fly away. But when they are very hungry, they sometimes decide to stay and eat. This suggests that they take various positive and negative factors into consideration and come to an overall decision, which seems like a key function that consciousness plays. Other insects have quite complex behaviors. A clear example of this is bees. Their behavior, including their famous waggle dance, which is used to communicate with other bees, leads us to think that they are conscious. The available evidence for crustaceans suggests that they are conscious. For example, crabs show evidence of nursing, rubbing, and guarding wounds. This appears to be a long-term, non-reflexive response to injury that is plausibly a key reason why suffering evolved. Bees communicate to other bees in their colony about the location of food by moving in ways that combine different factors. They agitate their bodies according to how much food they found. They move in a certain direction to signal the direction of the food, and they move for a certain length of time to indicate how far away the food is. The problem becomes more complex if we consider other animals with a simpler structure, without a brain, but only some central nervous ganglia. This is the structure of many invertebrates, for example, bivalve mollusks such as mussels and oysters, and gastropods such as snails. The behavior that many of these animals display is very simple. It can be performed without requiring that the animals that display it be conscious. However, many bivalves are mobile when they are young, and some, such as European fingernail clams, are more active, climbing on weeds to find a feeding spot. Some can swim and have image-forming eyes. An animal that has eyes might also have the experience of sight, and being able to experience something is what it means to be sentient. Some fingernail clams react with increased heart rates when under attack. Nematode worms are a possible edge case of consciousness, including evidence that they go into a fear-like state when they smell an odor of a predator. There is also a lot of evidence for various types of reinforcement learning in many groups of invertebrates. This means that they are able to update their behaviors based on negative and positive feedback. This may be an indicator that they have positive and negative experiences, which is another way of saying sentience. It is sometimes claimed that invertebrates could not experience conscious pain because they do not have nociception, which is the ability to detect damaging stimuli. Yet specialized nociceptors have been found in a number of invertebrates.
What has a brain? When we ask that, students will instantly tell you that their cat or dog has a brain, and most will say that a mouse or even a small insect has a brain, but almost nobody says that a plant or a tree or a shrub has a brain.
It's a well-known feature of our brain. It's called the plant blind. It's the inability to see or notice the plants in the environment. It's a kind of tool that protect our brain to be overloaded with a lot of information about this unuseful green stuff. We evolved in a forest, and it was much more important for us to be aware of animals, of other humans, and not to be overloaded with all this information about green. I would say that the life of the planet, it's a green life. All the animals, all together, human included, is just 0.3%. It's unbelievable that we don't know actually how these plants works, and we are all the time underestimating their amazing abilities. Plants have no organs. This is an unbelievable difference with animals. In other words, plants are able to see without eyes, they are able to hear without hearing, and they are able to taste and to smell and to breathe without the organs, and they are also able to make calculation, memorize, learning without brain. Now the point about plants is that they cannot move, but actually they move a lot. Now what is amazing about that is that they do this without using any energy, so they have no muscles.
The plant communicates with fragrances, so when a caterpillar attacks a leaf, the plant starts to produce leaf toxins, and at the same time she releases a cloud of fragrances to warn the neighboring tomatoes so they can too start with their defense. And the amazing thing is that the tomato not only knows that she is being attacked, but exactly who is attacking her. If she is attacked by spider mites, she produces a fragrance cocktail to attract predatory mites. They eat the spider mites. But if she is attacked by caterpillars, she produces a slightly different cocktail of fragrances to attract parasitic wasps. But how does the tomato plant know who is attacking her? She can identify the saliva. So the plant tastes the saliva of the insect and then produces a fragrance to attract the right bodyguard. What a great feat of communication. Another example, when apple trees are attacked or infested by caterpillars, such as the small winter moth, they release a fragrance cocktail to attract great tit birds. The birds smell the SOS signals of the attacked apple tree and thus find themselves a fat catch of caterpillars.
Can we tell that plants are conscious organisms? So, because I'm pretty sure that they are intelligent, I will not discuss with you about that. They are able to solve problems, and this is my preferred definition of intelligence. The consciousness is just your ability to build a model of yourself in relation to the space, to the other organism, and to the time. Are plants able to do that? Sensing, it's the first level of consciousness. So, plants are unbelievably more sensitive than animals. A single plant is able to detect at least 20 different chemical and physical parameters all the time. So we know that plants, for example, are very sensitive to gravity. Plants are also able to sense vibrations. So they are able to sense the sound, and also they are able to produce the sound. A growing roots is producing specific sounds that are probably used by the other root apex to have information about the position of the roots in the soil. Great. Social life. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time because the social life of the plant is very well known.
Underground, there is this other world, a world of infinite biological pathways that connect trees and allow them to communicate and allow the forest to behave as though it's a single organism. It might remind you of a sort of intelligence. The web is so dense that there can be hundreds of kilometers of mycelium under a single footstep. And not only that, that mycelium connects different individuals in the forest. Individuals not only of the same species, but between species, like birch and fir. And it works kind of like the internet. We have found that mother trees will send their excess carbon through the mycorrhizal network to the understory seedlings. Now, we know we all favor our own children. And I wondered, could Douglas fir recognize its own kin? So we set about an experiment, and we grew mother trees with kin and stranger seedlings. And it turns out they do recognize their kin. Mother trees colonize their kin with bigger mycorrhizal networks. They send them more carbon below ground. They even reduce their own root competition to make elbow room for their kids. When mother trees are injured or dying, they also send messages, wisdom, onto the next generation of seedlings. So trees talk.
There is much more with plants. They are able to memorize and to learn. We demonstrated just a few months ago that it's possible to teach a mimosa sensitive plant not to close anymore when there is a non-dangerous stimulus. This sensitive plant is able to maintain the information for 40 days. So I mean, the memory lasts at least 40 days. On the average, the memory in insect is just 24 hours. Intelligence and consciousness are real biological phenomena. So they can be studied as real, they need to be studied as real biological phenomena. And it's something like reproduction. I mean, there is reproduction, it's completely different in a bacteria, in fungi, and in humans, okay? But there is a common background that means that phenomenon is reproduction. It's the same for intelligence. It's different, but it's always the way the same.
I'd like to introduce you to an organism, a slime mold, Physarum polycephalum. It's a mold with an identity crisis because it's not a mold, so let's get that straight to start with. It is one of 700 known slime molds belonging to the kingdom of the amoeba. It is a single-celled organism, a cell, that joins together with other cells to form a mass supercell to maximize its resources. So within a slime mold, you might find thousands or millions of nuclei, all sharing a cell wall, all operating as one entity. Through the time lapse, I could observe some really interesting behaviors. For instance, having fed on a nice pile of oats, the slime mold goes off to explore new territories in different directions simultaneously. When it meets itself, it knows it's already there, it recognizes it's there, and instead retreats back and grows in other directions. I was quite impressed by this feat, how what was essentially just a bag of cellular slime could somehow map its territory, know itself, and move with seeming intention.
Well, one classic example, Japanese are so clever at this. They did several experiments. The most fun one is they designed a nutrient, basically a nutrient like maize, replicating Tokyo in the Japanese subway system. And so they started with Tokyo, and they put oats, which is a nutritional source. They inoculated what is on this basically an agar map with all the major cities, the nodes around Tokyo, and they then made each of those nodes had a piece of oat on them. It was a source of nutrition. The main oat was where Tokyo was. They inoculated it, and then they let the slime mold then grow. And first it grew out randomly, exploratorily, just like you would do if you're a hunter or something. You're hunting on the landscape looking for things. And then after about 28 hours, it reorganized itself in the most efficient way possible and reorganized the Japanese subway system in a more efficient manner than is designed today. Thus, they said this is a demonstration of cellular intelligence.
A complex system developed over time by community dwelling, civil engineering, urban planning, what taken us well over 100 years took the slime mold just over a day. Another study exposed cold air at regular intervals to the slime mold. It didn't like it, doesn't like it cold, doesn't like it dry. They did this at repeat intervals, and each time the slime mold slowed down its growth in response. However, at the next interval, the researchers didn't put the cold air on, yet the slime mold slowed down in anticipation of it happening. It somehow knew that it was about the time for the cold air that it didn't like. The conclusion from their experiment was that the slime mold was able to learn. So the question is, how does this thing work? It doesn't have a central nervous system. It doesn't have a brain, yet it can perform behaviors that we associate with brain function. It can learn, it can remember, it can solve problems, it can make decisions. So where does that intelligence lie? So this is a microscopy video I shot, and it's about 100 times magnification, sped up to about 20 times. And inside the slime mold, there is a rhythmic pulsing flow. A vein-like structure carrying cellular material, nutrients, and chemical information through the cell, streaming first in one direction and then back in another. And it is this continuous, synchronous oscillation within the cell that allows it to form quite a complex understanding of its environment, but without any large-scale control center. This is where its intelligence lies.
This has broad implications, and I just want people to suspend their disbelief. And this goes into actually the evolution of human consciousness.
The first fact here, I think, is the fact that the mind evolved in the sea. This idea has several sides to it. Firstly, just the fact that for all the early stages, for the first and crucial period, until about 400 million years ago, just about all life and all animal life was in the sea. That was the context. And in that period before life on land, most of the essentials were laid down. So the evolution of animals themselves, the evolution of nervous systems and then brains, the evolution of complex senses such as eyes, and of bodies that can act in complex ways. And to some extent, all the rest is fine-tuning. And when animals moved up on land, they took all this with them. They hauled up in their cells the chemistry of the sea where they came from. The next thing to think about is the overall shape of the history of animal life. Now, life in general forms the shape of a tree, roughly speaking. So from a single root, a series of branching events, usually with no rejoinings, extend to the present day. There are branchings and then divergence. This process began with single-celled life. We don't know the original forms, but based on what we know about single-celled organisms now, the picture to have in your mind is not little cells that are self-contained, little islands, but systems that are open to the world, sensing and responding, exhibiting behaviour, including even social behaviour on a tiny scale. Now, animals are one branch of multicellular life, and the first way to think about animals is they are one pretty big branch of the tree of life, a branch that comes off around 900 million years ago or so, perhaps. And in that transition to multicellular life, the sensing and signalling that cells had been doing as whole organisms in the unicellular state is now used to coordinate activities of cells within the new collective entities that had arisen, making possible coordinated and coherent action. So the social behaviour of cells becomes the means for all animal action. You have, firstly, the evolution of large brains and complex behaviour in our group, in the vertebrates. Many vertebrates are like this, especially mammals and birds. And in what we informally refer to as invertebrates, all the others, you mostly have animals that have small nervous systems and relatively simple behaviour, but with one big exception: the cephalopods, a group of mollusks.
The brain of the octopus shown here has 35 lobes of the brain, 80 million tiny cells, and even though that's interesting, what's really odd is that the skin of this animal has many more neurons, and there are 300 million neurons in the skin and only 80 million in the brain itself, 4 times as many.
These animals can change the entire colour of their skin in much less than a second.
There's actually one of those little satellite brains and the equivalent of a spinal cord for each of the 8 arms. This is a very unusual way to construct a nervous system in a body.
The big difference between them and us is the fact that more than half of the neurons in an octopus are not where you'd expect to find them, in the head, but spread through the body, especially within the arms themselves. And each of the arms appears to have some degree of autonomy as a kind of quasi-agent. Each arm has many senses. Whenever an octopus touches you, it's tasting you as well as feeling your shape. And they seem to do they seem to sort of determine at least the details of many of their motions themselves, and also engage in a kind of exploration on their own.
Well, they have short and long-term memory. They learn things in 3 to 5 trials. And the spatial memory is unusually good. The squids have a different kind of smarts, if you will. They have an extremely complex, interesting sex life. They have fighting and flirting and courting and mate guarding and deception. Now, another form of memory that's really unusual is episodic-like memory. This is something that humans need 4 years of brain development to do, to remember what happened during a particular event, where it happened, and when it happened. The when part is particularly difficult, and these children can do that, but guess what? We find recently that the wily cuttlefish also has this ability. Let's talk genetics just for a moment. We have genomes, we have DNA, DNA is transcripted into RNA, RNA translates that into a protein, and that's how we come to be. Well, the cephalopods do it differently. They have big genomes, they have DNA, they transcript it into RNA, but now something dramatically different happens. They edit that RNA as an astronomical weird rate, 100-fold more than we as humans or other animals do. And it produces scores of proteins. And guess where most of them are for? The nervous system. So perhaps this is an unorthodox way for an animal to evolve behavioral plasticity. This is a lot of conjecture, but it's food for thought.
Here we have a large nervous system in the vertebrate range, roughly 500 million neurons in the case of an octopus. And the most recent common ancestor of you on one side and an octopus on the other with its very large nervous system was that very simple worm-like creature living in the Ediacaran 600 million years ago. So what we really have is independent evolution from that point down two sides, and something we can think of as two independent experiments, evolutionary experiments, in the origin of large nervous systems and complex brains. So a cephalopod is what we're looking at, the results of the one experiment outside our line in the evolution of a large, really large nervous system. And I think of this consequently as the closest we'll ever come to meeting an intelligent alien.
Here is the fundamental question. Is the brain structure of an octopus basically different down to the tiniest level from the vertebrate line? Now, we don't know the answer, but if it turns out to be yes, then we have a different evolutionary pathway to create intelligence on planet Earth. And one might think that the artificial intelligence community might be interested in those mechanisms.
During the past 13.8 billion years, our universe has transformed from dead and boring to complex and interesting. And it has the opportunity to get dramatically more interesting in the future if we don't screw up. You know, about 4 billion years ago, life first appeared here on Earth, but it was pretty dumb stuff, like bacteria that couldn't really learn anything in their lifetime. We call that life 1.0. We are what I call life 2.0 because we can learn things, which of course in geek speak means we can upload new software modules. If I want to learn Spanish, I can study Spanish, and now I have all these new skills uploaded in my mind. And it's precisely this ability of us humans to design our own software rather than be stuck with what the software evolution gave us, which has enabled us to dominate this Earth and give us what we call cultural evolution. We seem to be gradually heading towards life 3.0, which is life that can design not just its software but also its hardware. Maybe we're at 2.1 right now. We can get cochlear implants, artificial knees, and a few minor things like this. But if you were a robot that was able to think as cleverly as right now, of course there would be no limits whatsoever how you could upgrade yourselves.
AI is not about trying to create life, right? That's not what it's about at all, but it's kind of very much feels like that. I mean, if we ever achieve the ultimate dream of AI, which I call the Hollywood dream of AI, the kind of thing that you see in Hollywood movies, then we will have created machines that are, conscious potentially in the same way that human beings are. So it's a fascinating idea. It's an idea that's been there kind of throughout human history, but it's an idea that we seem to now have the tools to potentially make real. So what most of contemporary AI is about is focused on getting AI systems to do very, very narrow tasks, very, very specific things. And in those specific tasks, it might be better than any living human being, but it can't do anything else. You can drive a car, I can drive a car, I can then get out of the car and play a game of football, rather badly in my case, and then make a good meal and tell a joke, and I can do that. The whole range of it. Consider a driverless car, however good it is at driving, it's doing one tiny narrow thing. So the grand dream of AI, it's not kind of formalized anywhere. There's no very specific version of it, but nowadays it goes by the name of Artificial General Intelligence, AGI. And basically what it means, if AGI succeed, if we achieve with that grand dream, then we'll have machines that have the same intellectual capabilities that human beings do. So how might we get there to conscious machines? One of the steps along that path is the idea that we will be able to build machines which can put themselves in another's mind. I think that's a step in the right direction, but the truth is we don't know how to even take that step at the moment. Human beings are wonderful creations. I mean, they are the most incredible creations in the entire universe, but there's nothing magic about it. We're a bunch of atoms that are bumping up against each other. For that reason, I don't think there should be any logical reason that says that conscious machines aren't possible. But saying that something is logically possible and saying that we know how to do it are completely different things. Do we know how to do it? Absolutely not. And actually, one of the fundamental problems is that consciousness itself in human beings is really not remotely understood. It is one of the big mysteries in science. How do that large number of neurons that are connected in all those kind of weird ways create consciousness and self-awareness, the human experience?
Well, I said the vocabulary was obsolete, and the vocabulary of humans and machines is already obsolete, because if by machine is meant a physical system capable of performing certain functions, then we're all machines. I'm a machine, you're a machine, and my guess is only machines could think. Why? Well, that's the next step. Thinking is a biological process created in the brain by certain quite complex but insufficiently understood neurobiological processes. So in order to think, you've got to have a brain, or you've got to have something with equivalent causal powers for the brain. We might figure out a way to do it in some other medium. We don't know enough about how the brain does it, so we don't know how to create it artificially. So could a machine think human beings are machines? Yes, but could you make an artificial machine that could think? Why not? It's like an artificial heart. The question, can you build an artificial brain that can think, is like the question, can you build an artificial heart that pumps blood? We know how the heart does it, so we know how to do it artificially. We don't know how the brain does it, so we have no idea. Let me repeat this. We have no idea how to create a thinking machine because we don't know how the brain does it. All we can do is a simulation.
I mean, Churchill said the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, but I hope we can learn from history on this one, because we have done exactly that mistake with slavery, where we said, oh, they don't feel pain or whatever, or women don't have souls, or animals don't feel pain. I was even told as recently as 5 years ago that it's okay to boil live lobsters before you eat them because it's proven that they don't feel pain. I guess someone asked them. And then now there's research showing that they do feel pain, and they banned lobster boiling in Switzerland.
Building an artificial brain is like building an artificial heart. The only thing is, no one has begun to try it. They haven't begun to try it because they have no idea how the actual brain does it, so they don't know how to imitate actual brains. Well, okay, but could you build an artificial brain that could think out of some completely different materials, out of something that had nothing to do with nucleoproteins, had nothing to do with neurons and neurotransmitters and all the rest of it? And the answer is, again, we don't know. That seems to me an open question. If we knew how the brain did it, we might be able to design machines that could do it using some completely different biochemistry, in a way that the heart does not use muscle. The artificial heart doesn't use muscle tissue to pump blood. You don't need muscle tissue to pump blood, and maybe you don't need brain tissue to create consciousness. We just are ignorant. But notice, there's no obstacle in principle. The problem is, no one has begun to think about how you would build a thinking machine, how you'd build a machine out of a thinking machine out of some material other than neurons, because they haven't begun to think about how we might simulate and how we might duplicate and not merely simulate what the brain actually does.
So let's not make that mistake again with art intelligence, or everybody pretty much in AI today. Again, this takes as an item of truth, as an axiom, that their machines can never suffer, and they have no qualms about turning them off. Yet they're trying to build ever more sophisticated ones, and with the attitude that they're going to use them as slaves. And I hope this time we can actually get it right and study the question of what information processing is conscious, to ensure that if AI does succeed in its ultimate quest to make machines that can do everything we can do, not only will we deploy them so that there is more human happiness and less human suffering, but to also make sure that we don't create a bunch of new forms of digital suffering.
We have a rather ambivalent attitude to science at present. We have come to expect a steady increase in the standard of living that science and technology have brought, but people distrust science because they don't understand it or feel they can control it. But an understanding of science fact would lay their fears to rest much better. But the rate of progress is now so rapid that there are always new developments that have occurred since one was at school or university. Popular science books and articles can help to put across these new developments. But only a small proportion of the population reads even the most successful book. It is clear that we are just an advanced breed of primates on a minor planet, orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. But ever since the dawn of civilization, people have craved for an understanding of the underlying order of the world. There ought to be something very special about the boundary conditions of the universe. And what can be more special than that there is no boundary? The fact that we humans, who are ourselves mere collections of fundamental particles of nature, have been able to come this close to an understanding of the laws governing us and our universe is a great triumph. So remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. And however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. While there's life, there is hope.